to stop, ensure that they don't do certain things, etc., and how can we control them, So to some extent, what they say and what actually it is, there is a difference, there's a gap. And that's where, the problem really arises. So now let's look at what are these issues which we'll be dealing with today. One is the recent amendments, which deals with one is the application and procedure for re-registration of charitable trusts, section 11 and 12. We are looking also at 1023C. We are also looking at section 80G. And then there is a option which is there under section 11, subsection 7, which has been inserted. Now that option is also, we'll deal with that. Then some of the controversies which I have seen from a practical, today in practice, one sees various issues coming up. What are those issues? Some of them are current issues. Some of them are issues which we will be seeing shortly because of the amendments to the forms, etc. On form number 10, the allocation of accumulation between the various purposes. Belated filing on form number 10, which is, we are seeing issues which are there. Accumulation under section 11 to, this is a very age-old controversy. I think for the last 20, 25 years, I've seen this controversy, whether for general purposes, specified purposes. We'll see what's the update on that. And carry forward of deficit, there is an amendment to the form, which I think we should be careful about when we fill up the form. Maybe we have already filled up the form in some cases, but we have to see what the impact of that is. Depreciation, there's an amendment 3 or 4 years back, but that amendment has now started giving rise to litigation. So therefore, what's the position there? Belated audit report, this year, the date of filing of the return and the date of filing of the audit report, there's a different dates because you file your audit report 1 month before and then file the return 1 month later. 15 Jan was the date for the audit reports, and 15th February is the date for the tax returns. And taxability of corpus donations. When a charitable trust, doesn't want to claim exemption under 12A or is not registered under 12A, what happens? What the corpus donation is, does that become taxable? And then on proviso to 215, I will just touch upon that. A few recent decisions and what is the trend which is happening, rather than covering that in detail, because that has been, I think, a hot topic for the last almost 7-8 years. We've been seeing a lot of litigation on that. So let's look at this re-registration of charitable trusts. Coming to that topic. The first thing, was the beginning of this was you had the CAG audit report 20 of 2013, where they said that charitable trusts, assessing officers are granting exemption under at the time of assessment without really looking at whether the charitable trust is registered or not. There is no authentic database which is available to the assessing officers. And therefore, they suggested that the ministry may consider providing a suitable database of registered trusts or institutions to the assessing officers to have a coordination between the authorities, assessment approving authorities and the assessing officers. So that was the suggestion which was made. Then after that, nothing was happened on that front for quite a long time. We had in between, of course, there was the proposal to have an All India Trust Law. One read in the newspapers about this provision of wanting to have an All India Trust Law. And under that All India Trust Law, they wanted to have all trusts registered. But I think because today you have certain states only, maybe around 6 or 7 states have the local trust legislation, Maharashtra and Gujarat being among them. But many states such as Goa, Delhi, Karnataka don't have any local trust registration. So therefore, the thinking was that let's have a trust registration which covers all charitable trusts. There is a Charitable Trust Act 1920, but that Charitable Trust Act, if you see, it is very brief, and it merely provides under what situations the courts can intervene, for what you need to go to the court for, etc. It's a very brief thing. I think hardly around 15 sections or so. So therefore, that is something which, ultimately that idea was dropped about having this all India legislation for charitable trust. And then the thought was, why not we look at it from the income tax perspective, that let's bring it an amendment to the income tax. So the Finance Act 2020 made certain amendments to the law requiring this registration. And this is, what was the reason given behind this for this bringing in these provisions? And in the finance minister said that charity institutions have to be registered with the tax department in order to claim tax exemption. And process of registration was completely manual in the past. It was completely manual and scattered all over the country. And then they say, in order to simplify the compliance for the new and existing charity institutions, I propose to make the process of registration completely electronic, and under which a new unique registration number will be issued to all new and existing charity institutions. Further, to facilitate the registration of new charity institution which is yet to start their charitable activities, I propose to allow them provisional registration for 3 years. Now, what was happening is you have this directorate of exemptions only in the 4 major metros. In all other cities, it is the Commissioner of Income Tax who grants the exemption, who grants the registration under 12A. I remember even in Mumbai earlier, there was no such, when you didn't have this provision for exemption directorate. At that point of time, we had the Commissioner of Income Tax Mumbai City 4. He was the person who would grant the registration under Section 12A because charitable trusts fell within the jurisdiction of City 4 range, City 4 charge. So that was there. Now, what was happening is, so you had a certain certificate issued by, say, Mumbai City 4 in Mumbai itself, and you have certain issued by CAT, DAT exemptions. They don't have a complete database. In fact, I remember maybe around 10 years back, there were charitable trusts who had got registered way back in 1962 or 63. And, we had the copy of the application which was made, but we didn't have the copy of the, the certificate. They had lost it, or it was not available, not traceable because of change of trustees over a period of time, etc. And actually, somebody had to go from our office, sit down with that manual register and find out, on what date it was registered, what was the registration number, and then apply for a duplicate certificate on that basis. So that was the, that was how bad it was, in that sense. And I don't think that they really computerized that whole register as well also, so therefore that is something which, so in a sense, because of the problems of the tax department in the past, the way they've handled it, today one has to now, bear up with this streamlining the re-registration requirement. But when it comes to the explanatory memorandum says quite something quite different. Of course, it says present process needs improvement with advent of technology and keeping in mind the practical issue of difficulty in obtaining registration before actually starting the activities. It was felt that the approval for exemption should also be for a limited period. Now, this is something which is new, which Finance Minister is quiet about, but the tax department, I think the explanatory memorandum one finds it. For a limited period, say for a period not exceeding 5 years at a time, which will act as a check to ensure that the conditions of approval are adhered to for want of continuance of exemption. This would in fact also be a reason for having a non-adversarial regime and not conducting roving inquiries in the affairs of exempt entities on day-to-day basis in general, as in any case, they would be revisiting the concerned authority for new registration before expiry of the period of exemption. This new process needs to be provided for both existing and new exempt entities. So this is the reason which they're giving, that saying that, for limiting the period to 5 years, they're saying that, your registration, which is permanent today, once you register, it's a permanent registration. We will restrict it only to a period of 5 years. And the purpose behind this is that they say that we will, once in 5 years, you will undergo the scrutiny. Assessing officer will not undertake a detailed thing, and you will have a non-adversarial regime. I think we will have to wait and see whether this is truly borne out, because the experience in the past has always been that this ends up as an additional scrutiny in addition to your normal scrutiny. Because let's look at it this way, that if you look at section 215, say for instance, proviso to 215. Now the proviso to 215, the way this law is worded is very clearly that the applicability of the proviso to 215 has to be seen with respect to the activities carried out in a particular year. So it's only during the assessment proceeding that can be looked at. So far as the registration is concerned, irrespective of whether the proviso to 215 applies or not, registration has to be granted if it is a charitable organization, even if it carries on an activity in the nature of trade, commerce, or business, or in relation to trade, commerce, or business. So therefore, really, I think, I don't know to what extent the scrutiny will be reduced, but it's something which we'll have to wait and see, or this will be one more hassle which we'll have to undergo. And when we come to the end of this, we will just analyze that what will be the problems, potential problems which one will face, and is it really practicable, to have this provision? Now let's look at the respective provisions. And so, in the case of trusts which are existing, which are registered currently, all trusts which are currently registered, earlier they were required to make an application for registration between June 2020, 1st June 2020 to August 2020. But because of the lockdown and the COVID situation, so then they announced that this is extended, and finally by the Amendment Act which came in, the period has now been settled from 1st April 2021 to 30th June 2021. So within a period of 3 months from 1st April 2021, all trusts which are currently registered have to make an application for registration. And this registration has to be will be granted under Section 12AB for a period of 5 years by the principal CIT, within a period of 6 months from the end of the month in which the application has been. Now, interestingly, here there is no provision for calling for documents. There's no provision for calling for documents, making of inquiry, or satisfaction by the commissioner, etc. There is no such provision which is there. So, therefore, this seems to indicate that this will be an automatic registration. They will just merely look at whether you have registered earlier. If you are registered earlier, this will be registered now, and you'll be granted that unique registration number. So that is the thing. So of course, I mean, we are very fond of multiple numbers. You have a PAN, you have a TAN, you have now for individuals you have UDINs, and now for trusts you have this URN, which is a unique registration number which will come in. So, but fortunately, at least at this stage, that when we file, right now we will not have a problem, and it will be an automatic registration. Now, from the indication, it appears that the application will have to be an online application. They have not yet prescribed the forms for this because this process will start from 1st April. So probably in the month of March, we will see the forms coming out. Question is whether it will be the form 10A or there will be a different form for this automatic, because when we see a little later, you will see that there will be cases where there will have to be scrutiny also. When you're in the case of at certain point of time, there will be a renewal which will be required, and at that point of time, you will have to furnish various details. So therefore, there will be 2 separate forms, is my guess. Today on this, the application for then once you have been granted the certificate for a period of 5 years, you then have to renew this, apply for renewal of this certificate of registration. So earlier, what was happening is that your form has to be filed under Section 12A. The registration was being granted under Section 12AA. Now the form will still be filed under 12A. The registration will be granted under 12AB. So that is the. Now you will have to apply for renewal of this registration which you have got at least 6 months before the end of your 5 years registration. So before the end of that 5-year registration, you will apply for the renewal. You have to apply for renewal. So every 5 years, you've got to keep a tab that yes, you've got to apply for renewal. So this trust, this is one more thing now. Your FCRA, you've got to keep on applying for renewal every 5 years. So similarly, now you will also have to keep in mind your 12AB registration every 5 years. You'll have to keep in mind. Now at this stage, you will have to satisfy the principal commissioner on various things. So when it comes to renewal, the principal commissioner can call for documents and make inquiries to be satisfied about what? The genuineness of activities of the trust. And this is an amendment which came in about a couple of years back, that compliance of requirements of any other law as a material for the purposes of achievement of its objects. So the commissioner can, whatever documents he can. Now, of course, when you're talking about any other law as a material for the purpose of achievement of its objects, the question arises, what are these documents, what is this, which laws are we talking about? Now, when we're saying the law which is material for the purpose of achievement of its objects, really, would you look at, say, FCRA, would you look at a Mumbai Public Trust Act, and is it the law which is material, has to be material, or is it the requirements which have to be material? I think it's the requirements which are required to be material. So therefore, if within FCRA or within the Maharashtra Public Trust Act, there is a requirement which is material for the purpose of achievement of the objects, then those requirements is what the commissioner can look into. The question is whether the commissioners are equipped is a question mark, and which is one area where there is likely to be a large scale litigation. Frankly speaking, I think this is one thing which one will have to bear with. So the once the commissioner he examines the various documents and is satisfied about the objects of the trust, genuineness of the activities, and compliance with the requirements of the other laws, material requirements of other laws, the principal commissioner shall grant registration within a period of 5 years. And that registration, sorry, I'll just switch off my video. I think my internet connection is a little. Yeah. So once he is satisfied about the objects of the trust, genuine and compliance with the material requirements of other laws, he will grant you registration. And that registration, there's a time limit for the commissioner to grant that registration. That is 6 months from the end of the month in which the application has been made. So that's why you have to apply 6 months early, so that to ensure that your registration is granted, by the end of expiry of the earlier registration. Now, this renewal also will be for a period of 5 years. So again, after 5 years, you will have to pay. Now, what happens if the commissioner is not satisfied? Now, in that situation, if the commissioner is not satisfied, the application will be rejected. It will not only be rejected, but the registration will be cancelled after affording an opportunity of being heard. If it was merely rejected, there would not have been such a problem. Okay, your income going forward, you would pay tax on it. But when we talk about registration of cancellation after affording opportunity of being heard, the problem here is that the provisions of Section 115 TD may come into play. And what is Section 115 TD? As it's the most draconian section, I think, under the Income Tax Act. What it says that if a trust converts itself into a charitable organization, converts itself into a non-charitable organization, and there are 2 or 3 things, provisions under, circumstances in which this will apply. The trust will have to pay tax on the fair market value of its assets within a period of 15 days from that. Now, the question is, there is unfortunately a deeming provision which says that if your registration under Section 12A is cancelled, then it is deemed that you have converted yourself from a charitable to a non-charitable trust. Now, this is a very draconian thing, and therefore, if your registration under Section 12AA gets cancelled, then 115 TD will come into play, and you may have to pay tax on the fair market value of the assets. Now, I understand that 115 TD so far has not been invoked much because it's been on the statute books for only 4 or 5 years. But I think one of the cases which is I think before the tribunal currently is in the case of Tata Trust. I understand that this has been invoked in the case of some of the Tata Trust, and that matter is before the tribunal currently. But so therefore there is not much jurisprudence on that. But the way it reads is it's certainly very draconian that you pay tax on the fair market value of the assets. Why fair market value of the assets? Because of the fact that they feel that, yes, you've got exemption, you built up all these assets over the years because of the fact that you've enjoyed exemptions. Now that we're taking away the benefit of the exemption, whatever benefits you got in the past should also be taken away. That seems to be the logic behind it. So, in case of new trusts, all trusts whose application under Section 12AA is pending as on 1st April 21, where no order has been passed. And other new trusts have to apply for registration under 12AA 1 month prior to the commencement of the previous year, relevant to the assessment year from which registration is sought. And we'll come to that a little later. But this is so before for the year for which you want exemption. Say you want exemption for the year 2022-23. So 1 month prior to commencement of financial year 2022-23, you will have to apply for the registration. And for a new trust, how will you apply? So pending application, it seems that they will be automatically converted into application under due procedure. You may have to file again the new form, perhaps that may be a requirement to come in. But in the case for new trust, say today you want to set up a trust. The trust you're setting up in the month of let's say in June 2000, after this amendments have come into play, in June 2021, you want to set up a new trust. So you set up the trust in June 2021. Now you want exemption for the financial year 2021-22. of the state that should have applied for registration not in June 2021 set up. You should have applied for registration in the month before 1st of March 2021, even before the trust was set up. This is a ridiculous provision. So therefore, it means that effectively for the initial year, the first year itself, you don't get any registration at all. I don't know whether this is intended or not intended. This is something which has been pointed. Some disturbance. If
Yes, I'm just looking into it.
yeah, so so the first year which the trust is set up, the way it works is, today you will not get exemption for the first year. So in June 2020, so 21, when you're set up, you will apply for registration before 28th of February 2022, and then you will get your benefit of registration from financial year 22-23. That's how the provision now reads. And what sort of registration will you get? You will get, they have come up with a new concept. The new concept is a provisional registration. You will be given a provisional registration under 12AB for a period of 3 years from the assessment year from which registration is sought. Now you are seeking registration for the next financial year. So therefore, for that, the assessment year relevant to that financial year is what they will give you from that year onward for a period of 3 years. And this registration, of course, because, it seems to be an automatic process. So all they will look at is whether, your objects are charitable, or maybe whether, you have a registration with charity commissioner, etc. And this will be granted within a period of 1 month from the end of the month in which the application is made. So that is the so here also, again, as I said, there is no provision for calling for documents, making of inquiry, or requirement of satisfaction, and therefore this seems to be an automatic registration. Sorry, 1 second, it's not moving down. So the new trust then, on renewal of that, it will make application for regular registration 6 months prior to, just like other trusts. But this application is not within 5 years, because your 3 years gets over. So 6 months prior to that expiry of the period of 3 years, or within 6 months of commencement of activities, whichever is earlier. So your provisional registration may not necessarily hold good for 3 years. Effectively it may hold good until 6 months after commencement of your activities. That, of course, there's no provision saying that will be cancelled by a provisional registration. But this is a requirement. Now, what do you mean by commencement of activities? And that is the big question mark. If you start raising funds, is that a commencement of activities, or would it only cover activities in the attainment of the objects? Well, I think this is possibly, commencement of activities will also cover activities of fundraising. I think this should be covered. But if it covers only activities in attainment of objects, when does the activities commence? When you start hiring your employees, or actual start of activities by the employees? If it involves setting up of an institution, like say for instance a hospital, when is the commencement of activities? When you start to look out for land, when you acquire the land, when you complete construction of building, when you complete the building, or the hospital actually starts functioning. Now that is again a big question mark. The department may say that no, it's only when the hospital actually starts functioning, or I mean, you may take the stand. You will say no, when you started to look out for land, that's when your activity started. So it may work both ways. So therefore, this is something which I hope there will be some clarity which will come about on that, some clarification which will come on that, because otherwise you will get into litigation as to whether your application is in time or not. Suppose if I were to donate money to another trust, would that amount to commencement of activities? In my view, yes, because you have started your activity, you identified a trust which is, whose objects are similar to yours, and which is doing good activities, and therefore your activities have commenced over there. Now, the question, of course, is if there's a delay in application, would it be fatal to your regular registration? I would feel that no, possibly, because the way the courts have been looking at this procedural lapses is that, okay, at the most what will happen is you'll get your registration from the year, subsequent, wherever you applied for registration. The year following that is what you will get registration from. So so it would not be fatal to your regular registration, slight delay. That's what, but this is again an area where there is likely to be some litigation, as there has been litigation in the case of 12A registration as well. Here, the commissioner can call for document, make inquiries, and he will be satisfied, just like for other trusts, that objects, genuineness of activities, and compliance with requirements of other laws. and he will grant registration for a period of 5 years within the 6 months from the end of the month in which the application is made. There is the other category, and as you know, today also it is there under 12A, that a trust body which modifies its objects, it is required to apply for registration under section 12A again. So now they're saying that in case of a trust which modifies its objects, which do not conform to the conditions of registration, the application for registration has to be made within 30 days from the date of adoption or modification of the objects. And the procedure is the same as cases of renewal of registration. So, of course, the issue which there is there today also, what is the date of adoption or modification of objects? That issue will still continue to be alive even under this new registration requirement. In the case of a charitable trust, is it when the court approves the amendment to the objects clause? I think yes, it's the court order, which would be the relevant date. In the case of a society, is it the second? You're supposed to have two AGMs. First AGM confirms the amendments. The second AGM ratifies the amendments. So therefore, the second AGM would possibly be the date of amendment. So far as the company is concerned, the date on which the amendment to the objects comes into force, we'll have to look at company law. So that's the way, depending on what type of organization it is. There is one more category of trusts, and trusts whose registration, which is because of that option which is provided, which we'll look at a little later, that those trusts whose registration under 12A becomes inoperative due to the first provision to section 11.7, that they have to apply for registration 6 months prior to the commencement of the assessment year from which registration sought to be made operative. Now, this is 6 months prior to the commencement of the assessment year, fortunately, and that is what should have been there even for the other provision, rather than commencement of the previous year relevant to the assessment year. So this is 6 months prior to the commencement of the assessment year from which registration sought to be made operative. So that is within the previous year itself, effectively. So therefore, if when that option you are exercising, that option should therefore be exercised, before 30th of September and not after 30th of September. That's the thing. And the procedure is the same as cases of renewal of registration. The same procedure will have to be applied, will apply there. Now let's look at 1023C. So 1023C also we have approval under clauses 4, 5, 6 or 6A, 4 clauses of 1023C. Now this also, there is a similar provision which is there. You've got to make this application within 3 months from 1st April 2021. Now there are other trusts which are eligible, which are schools and hospitals, whose gross receipts are less than 1 crore, or who are mainly or substantially financed by the government. Now those trusts fall under clauses 3AB, 3AC or 3AD, 3AE. They still do not require approval. That is not required. So whatever the existing cases which require approval, which is under clause 4, 5, 6 or 6A, those will continue to require approval. And then you will have to follow the new procedure that is similar to your 12AB registration. Here also you will make this registration. You'll have to apply for approval. First, as I said, similar to 12AB, this seems to be automatic. Again, no documents, etc. will be called for. They will at the most call for proof of your earlier registration certificate. That may be, I think, the requirement. We'll have to wait and see what the forms require you to do. And for renewal, again, at the time of renewal, it's what they will look at everything. They will ask for all active details, etc. And again, the commissioner will have to be satisfied about the genuineness of activities and compliance of material requirements of any other law. So that is, so those are the, again, when it comes to renewal, before 6 months prior to the expiry of your new approval, you will have to apply for renewal. And if the commissioner is not satisfied, application will be rejected and registration will be cancelled, your approval is cancelled after affording opportunity of being heard again. So in case of new cases, again, here you have the same procedure of automatic provisional approval, which is being there. So there will be a provisional approval, which is for a period of 3 years, just like under 12AB, there will be a provisional approval. Existing applications which are pending will be automatically converted into applications under the new procedure. And at this initial stage of provisional registration of provisional approval, there will be no requirement of documents or inquiry or requirement of satisfaction. It's an automatic process in that sense. And here again, the requirement is within 6 months of commencement of activities or 6 months prior to the expiry of that 3-year provisional approval. You have to, whichever is earlier, you've got to apply for your renewal. So the same questions do come up. And at the time of renewal, they will look at everything. The commissioner will look at everything. He will look at call for documents, make inquiries, and satisfy about the objects, genuineness of activities, and and compliance with material requirements of other laws. And then such this thing will be granted for a period of 5 years within 6 months from the end of the month in which the application was made. Now, coming to that option, and that option is something which we, let's look at that. What it says that this is an amendment to section 11, subsection 7. This clause was already there, and that clause said that today the provision of section 11.7 was that if today you are registered under, you are approved under the, you're granted registration under 12A or 12AA, and the registration is in force, and then you will not get deduction under any other clause of section 10, other than section 1023C or section 10.1. Now, to that, of course, they have added that 1046 also. Those are the notified cases by the government, so certain cases. So so these three are the cases where exemption is not allowable under 11.7. That was the position. Now, what they've inserted two provisos with effect from 1st June 2020. There is no change in this date by this taxation and other laws of relaxation and amendment. This date has not changed. Whereas the date so far as the application for approval, registration or approval, those have changed. This has not changed at all. It still remains 1st June 2020. So what does it say? It says that the registration will become inoperative from the date on which it is approved under 1023C or notified under 1046, or the date on which this proviso has come into force, that is 1st June 2020, whichever is later. So if you are registered now, your registration on, if you were already registered under 1023C as well as 12AA, then your registration under section 12AA will become inoperative. So it will not become cancelled. It will not be cancelled. It will not, become void. It will become inoperative. This is a new term which has come into force. So there will be you have an inoperative registration which is there. You can apply to get the registration made operative under 12A or 12AB, and when you do so, that approval under 1023C or the notification under 1046 ceases to have effect from the date on which the registration becomes operative. And therefore, thereafter, the trust will not be entitled to exemption under those clauses. So therefore, what happens is this is a one-time thing, that today the position is that your 12AA registration becomes inoperative. If you choose to go back to 12AA registration, then from the date on which that registration becomes operative, your approvals under 1023C and notification under 1046 become ineffective, and you are not entitled to exemption at all under those clauses. You can't apply also, is what, the way it reads. I think you are not entitled to exemption under those clauses. The question is, of course, at a later point of time, can you again say that I will go back? The language doesn't seem to support that, but it's something which there may be litigation on that. So the presumption here, therefore, under this section is that you're opting for 1023C or 1046 firstly, and then you may choose to go under 12AA or 12AB. And once having gone under 1023C or 1046, you can go to 12AA or 12AB, but then you cannot go back to 1023C or 1046. That it seems to be there. Now, as we saw that clauses 3D, 3AC, 3AD, or 3AE, there is no requirement of approval still, so therefore that option still continues for these cases where the gross receipts are less than 1 crore, hospitals or medical or educational institutions, where the approval, either the gross receipts are less than 1 crore or which are wholly or substantially financed by the government. There you don't need approvals. So therefore, you still have, according to me, a choice there. You can still, your registration and 12AA will still, or 12AB will still be operative. So far as your this is concerned, 1023C also will continue to be valid, and you can choose each year which you, of course, the language, unfortunately, of 11.7, and which is a problem. Do you really have a choice under section 11.7? So 11.7 says that if you are approved under 1023 or 10, if you are registered under 12AA, you cannot claim any registration. Now, of course, 1023C and 1046, you have a choice. So you can choose to go under not 1021. 1021 is a registered scientific research institution. So if it's 1021, you don't have a choice at all. Under 1023C and 1046, you have a choice. You go either under that or you go under 12AA. 1023C, at least, the ones which you have is the ones which are where you don't require approval. You have a choice. But otherwise, if you're falling under 1023C 6, 6A or 4 or 5, there you really again don't have a choice. You will automatically have to go under those clauses of 1023C. That's the way the language. And that's what is the purpose of this? And again, let's look at explanatory memorandum to the Finance Act, which explains what is by providing exclusion to institutions or fund registered under 1023C. But the same exclusion is not available to entities claiming exemption under 1046, which are established or constituted under Central or State Act or Central. So they are extending this, they are not able to. So therefore, the anomaly needs to be addressed. Now, interesting, this is very important. As the provisions related to charitable entities constitute a complete code, and then once any trust or institution has voluntarily opted for it by obtaining the requisite registration, it flows that the conditions of relation thereto should be complied with, and the option of switching and convenience should not be available. Accordingly, while request for exclusion of clause 46 may be acceded to for exemption thereunder, even in those cases where registration 12A or 12AA remains in force, there should be only one mode of exemption available, and also that the switching may be allowed only once, so that such switching is not done routinely and also it remains efficient to be administered. So there they confirm that you're allowed to switch once, you're allowed to switch back from 1023C or 1046 into 12AB. Once you have switched that, then you will never be able to go back to your 1023C or 1046. That's the way it seems to be. Now let's look at this. When you exercise this option, the anomaly of the effective dates. As we saw that 11.7 provisos come into effect from 1st of June 2020. The new registration, etc., the whole procedures come into effect from 1st April 2021. Now let's take cases where you have existing approval under 1023C or 1046. There what happens is your 12A, 12AA or 12AB approval becomes inoperative with effect from 1st June 2020. Of course, not 12AB. It will be 12A or 12AA approval that becomes inoperative from 1st June 2020. If you prefer to opt for 12AB registration, then you need to apply to make it operative. But for assessment year 21-22, your application is to be made 6 months prior to the commencement of the assessment year from which registration is sought to be made operative. So you should have applied by 30th September 2020, for which there was no procedure in place at all. There's no form or procedure laid down to date, and therefore it was impossible to exercise the option. So even if you still, say that the 11.7 provisos are effective from 1st April to 21, saying that, okay, this budget will probably rectify that anomaly, etc. The problem does not get solved, because really then from 1st April 21, your 12A becomes inoperative. So therefore, that is a problem which still remains. Now, therefore, the law as it now seems, unless there is an amendment in tomorrow's budget, the law it seems is that for assessment year 21-22, those cases which are registered under 1023C or 1046 will necessarily have to go under 1023C or 1046. And before 30th September 2020, they can exercise the option for the next year to make 12AB the same operative. And it's at that point of time that, so the question then is, should you apply for your registration under 12AB on 1st of April? I think yes, it's advisable to do both, your 1046 as well as your 12AB. And, let the provisos have unless there is some clarification on this, this is a problem area, frankly speaking. Coming to the point of how should we exercise the option, and we look at this section 11 versus section 1023C. What are the major principal requirements? I've just tried to look at it. So each trust, you will really have to apply your mind and see whether you want, whether it's required or not, what is the position. For instance, for audit, under both 1023C as well as section 11, audit is required. Accumulation of 15% is available under both section 11 and section 1023C. Option to spend in subsequent year, that is not available under 23C. Under section 11, yes, you have the option to spend in the subsequent year. The 5-year accumulation is available under both the sections. Under 1023C, you don't have to file a form. Under section 11, you have to file a form for accumulation. You have to file that form number 10. If the accumulation is not spent within 5 years, what happens? Under 1023C, you lose your exemption altogether. Now, whether that is a complete loss of exemption retrospectively or prospectively is not very clear. It seems that it will be only prospectively when that failure happens. Section 11, you don't lose your exemption. It is only the unspent accumulation which becomes taxable in the 6th year. Both the sections have got exemptions for corpus donations. Corpus donations under section are exempt under both 1023C and section 11. 115TD. Now, 115TD, as we said, the draconian section, that does not apply to trusts which are registered under 1023C. It applies to trusts which are registered under 12A. So that will apply there. Taxability of anonymous donations. For both cases, anonymous donations will be taxed. Exemption for capital gains on reinvestment of capital asset, that is not available under 1023C. So your 11(1)(a), capital 11(1)(a), which is there under section 11, where you reinvest the proceeds of capital, when you sold a capital asset, you reinvest the proceeds in another capital asset within the same year. You get full exemption for the capital gains. So that is available under section 11. That is not available under 1023C. The restriction on investments, 11(5), or the list of investments which you are required to adhere to, that restriction is there under both these sections, both section 1023C as well as section 11. And you have section 13(1)(d) under section, which applies to section 11, which says that if you give any benefit to a settler or a trustee or a substantial contributor, then you lose the benefit of exemption. Courts have, of course, held that you lose the benefit of exemption only for that portion which is utilized for the benefit of that person and not the entire exemption. But under 1023C, there is no such restriction on benefit to specified persons. That is not there. So there is no loss of exemption, which is, though of course, there could be litigation on that. The tax department may try to take a stand that you're not charitable at all in that situation. So that is the, so this basically, I think, I've tried to, on an overall perspective, which is better, so you have to look at each trust from your perspective, for the trust, what is it? For instance, those trusts who don't spend at all, we've got some trusts who accumulated every year they're accumulating, and in the 6th year they're paying the tax on that accumulation. So for them, we have clearly advised them that you go under section 11, don't go under 1023C, because 1023C really doesn't make sense for you. You will lose the exemption altogether. Then coming to the next topic, the next category of registrations, and that is under 80G. Again, now 80G, all trusts which are approved under 80G will now also again have to make an application from 1st April 21 to 30th June. Approval will be granted for 5 years, again, similar to 12AB. Automatic, it seems that it will be automatic for the first time for this 5 years. And then again, before 6 months of expiry of that 5-year period, you've got to again make, at which point of time all documents will be called for and seen. Today, as you know, your 80G is a permanent registration, which is a permanent approval. You don't have to go back every time, but now this seems that every 5 years you'll have to do that. Then for a new 80G application, you've got to make this application 1 month prior to the commencement of the previous year related to assessment year from which approval is sought. Again, this is a problem, practical difficulty for a new trust, etc. So first year, you will effectively not have your 80G. So this is, and the provisional approval also, you have the same concept over here that you have a provisional approval for a period of 3 years. For the provisional approval, it seems to be automatic approval. There is no calling for documents, making of inquiry or requirement of satisfaction. And again, you're similar to your 12A or 1023C. You have that you make the application for regular approval 6 months prior to the expiry of your period of provisional approval, or within 6 months of commencement of activity, whichever is earlier. Now, so therefore, 80G also today, the problem used to be that the commissioner would say that what activities have you carried on? Show me what activities you carried on. When you start activities, that I will give you your 80G's approval. So that, I think, problem will now will go away. But you will have the issue of complete again and again going back to the commissioner every 5 years. And incidentally, this requirement was done away with in 2009. And at that point of time, you had to renew it every 5 years. And there, I think the finance minister specifically said that investments of funds have to be approved by the commissioner under ATG 5, and every approval will be applicable only for 5 years. Due to this limitation imposed on the validity of such approval, approved institutions of where the hardship of getting the approval is renewed from time to time. This is unduly burdensome for bona fide institution of funds and also leads to wastage of time and resources of the tax administration in renewing such approvals in a routine manner. And therefore, they said that the approval once granted shall continue to be valid in perpetuity. This was the position in 2009. And now, after 11 years, they are seeing that they're saying that no, this is not a waste of time. This is the resources are not wasted. We will do it in a better manner. Now, the problem really is this. Let's understand that you have, say, X number of trusts, say maybe a lakh of trusts which are registered in a 12A. You have another maybe 2 lakh institutions or 1 lakh institutions which are registered under 1020C, and you have 50,000 which are registered under ATG. Now, all these will file for provision, will file for this thing, which will be automatic for 5 years. But at the end of that period of 5 years, within 6 months, they will have to dispose of all these 250,000 applications, plus all those new ones which have got registered within that period, which may be another, say, 25,000 cases. So I don't know whether that is practically possible or feasible for them to do all this. This also, will be, I suppose, a faceless thing. So, therefore, practical difficulties will arise the way they have sought to do this. I think they should have just restricted themselves to registration, giving them a registration number under automatic this thing, instead of getting into this every 5-year thing, because this every 5-year thing will create problems, but it will create problems for the department, whether they will be able to process it. It will create problems for the taxpayers or the trusts as well. Whether the trusts, you will be likely to see a large number of trusts where this may be renewal may be refused, and that is when which will be a problem. And one more point I will take before we take the question answer on this, and that is under ATG, there's a new requirement with effect for 1st April 21, and that is a requirement of furnishing of periodical statements in the prescribed form and certificate to the donor, containing the amount of donation and other prescribed particulars. So one is that you furnish the periodical statement in the prescribed form to the tax department. Secondly, you have to give a certificate to the donor containing the amount of donation and other prescribed particulars. And the finance minister in the budget speech, what has the finance minister said, is saying that currently a taxpayer is required to fill complete details of donee in the tax return for hourly deduction. In order to ease the process of claiming deduction for donation, we are proposing to pre-fill the donee's information in the taxpayer's return on the basis of information on donation furnished by the donee, and this will result in hassle-free claim of deduction. So this seems to be the intention which the finance minister said. But if you look at the explanatory memorandum, it is quite something quite different. It says, at present, there is no reporting obligation by the exempt entity receiving donation or any sum in respect of such donation. With the advancement in technology, it is now feasible to standardize the process through which one-to-one matching between what is received by the exempt entity and what is claimed as deduction by the assessee. This standardization may be similar to the provisions relating to the tax correction or deduction at source, which already exists in the Act. Therefore, entities receiving donation or sum may be made to furnish a statement in respect thereof and to issue a certificate to the donor payee, and claim for deduction may be allowed on that basis only. In order to ensure proper filing of the statement, levy of fee and penalty may be also provided in cases where there is failure to furnish the statement. So now, your TDS, all of you know what are the hassles which one still face almost 17 years or 17 or 18 years after this Form 26AS was introduced. This matching this enthusiasm for this one-to-one matching, I think, still you are having problems of getting the credit, and, this is one of the maximum areas of heartburn for taxpayers. And here, again, your GST also, they wanted to do that, but of course, they postponed it. But so far as here, again, they want to do it for donations. The question is really, is it worth the amount of time and effort which people will spend in, entering in details of each and every donation? Now, there are likely to be trusts which receive a large number of small donations. Now, just imagine you will have to have accountants and the same people who will have to fill in the form and, upload the form. And in that, there will be typing mistakes, there will be errors, which will then you have to rectify that. they will prescribe some penalty for that. So all this is, I think, is something which should not really be there. Do we really need such micromanagement? And that's the question which arises. Well, I think now with that completes the amendment part of it. And sorry, we can just maybe also look at the the explanatory memorandum really sums up the this thing, and which so they are mentioning that that similar to exemption and 1023C and exempt 1046 shall be allowed to an entity even not registered. If it makes to operative in future, it will have to file the application. Then it will not be entitled for 1046, your 12A registration. If 12A registration becomes inoperative in case of entity exempted in 1020C, also they have to bring in uniformity. They're saying, I don't know why there was a need for uniformity. Anyway, the condition about making it operative again would be similar to what is proposed for 1046. An entity approved, registered, or notified under 1020CC, 12W or 35 shall be required for approval or registration or intimate regarding it approved, as the case may be. And on doing so, the approval, registration, or notification shall be valid for a period not exceeding 5 years at one time calculated for 1st April 20. An entity already approved under 80G shall also be required to apply for approval, and doing so, it will be valid for a period of not exceeding 5 years. Application for approval under 80G shall be made to Commissioner. An entity making fresh application for approval on 1023C or 12AA or 80G shall be provisionally approved or for 3 years on the basis of application without detailed inquiry. That's what they're saying. Even in cases where activities of the entity are yet to begin, then it has to apply again for approval or registration, which shall be valid from date of such provisional registration. The application of registration subsequent to that will have to be made at least 6 months prior to expiry of provisional registration or within 6 months of start of activities, whichever was earlier. Application pending for approval registration shall be treated as application according to new provisions wherever they are being provided for. Deduction under 80G, 80GGA to a donor shall be allowed only if a statement is furnished by the donee, who shall be required to furnish a statement in respect to donation received. And in event of failure to do so, fee and penalty shall be levied. So therefore, there's a penalty which is already there for non-furnishing of statement. Similar to 80G, deduction of cash donation under 80GGA shall be restricted to 2,000 only. So these were the amendments which were brought out by the last year's budget, So now I think if there are any questions on this, we can take it up and then we can move on to the controversies. Yeah, Anuj, if you could, if there are any questions, you can.
Yes, Gautam bhai. There are certain questions which I have received in the chat box. One is there any time limit to grant the URL?
That's what the registration under 12AB is you'll be given the URN. That itself, that registration when you are granted, you will get that URN.
No. So I think the query is whether there is any time limit on the income tax department to give the URN.
See, there's time limit for the commissioner when he has to give that registration. There's within 6 months from the end of the month in which the application was made. So that time limit is there on the department. So similar to what you have today under 12A, so that similar requirement is there. There is a time limit.
Got it. Next question is again from Usha Kadam. The question is, what is the difference between 1023C and 12A for educational institution? What changes?
Given that chart, no, that between 11. So 12A means you're going exemption under section 11. So 1023C and section 11, I've given in that chart, the 14, 15 points, where there's a differential.
Next question is, in trust, purchase of asset can be taken as application of income, whether there is a similar rule in 1023C.
Yes, I think because there it really talks about there is no specific provision, but because of depreciation thing, also there is a similar provision which is there. So therefore, your capital expenditure on objects will also be allowable there as well.
Last question: that whether there is any form prescribed format prescribed for giving a certificate to the donor.
That format has not yet come out. Those statements, so it will probably be somewhat like your TDS statements, where you'll have to give the name of the donor, the address, the PAN, etc. All those details will probably be required. Now, of course, the question is, does this mean that PAN will become mandatory even for small donations? That's the question which, or will they say that okay, only donations above a particular limit you file? See, I can understand that if you want large donation details, you want to cross-check. say a donation above 50,000 or a lakh of rupees, because those will be comparatively less. But if you ask for donations of 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, even 5,000 or 10,000, I think it's going to create a havoc, for trusts. Particularly, most of these trusts, you have part-time accountants, you don't have a full-time accountant. Now, the trust will necessarily have to hire full-time staff to do all this, clerical work.
So basically, more cost burden to kind of do the charitable activity.
Yeah, absolutely. So first you first set up your office and then you start your charitable activity. That seems to be the approach.
Right. I think these were some of the questions which were asked in the chat box, and we have done with all of them.
Okay, so then shall we move on to the controversies?
Yes, I think we can.
Okay. Okay. The first controversy I wanted to deal with is, the accumulation under section 11.2. As you know, under section 11, subsection 2, you can accumulate the unspent income for a period of 5 years from the end of the year in which, for which the accumulation is being sought. Now, and in the, if you don't spend it by the 6th year, or amount is taxable in the 6th year. So really you get 5 plus 1, 6 years you really get to spend that money, and it becomes taxable in the 6th year, though the form has to be filed for a period of 5 years. That's the. Now you have to furnish the form number 10, and along with the form number 10, a resolution has to be furnished, which is for accumulation of the resolution of the trust. Now, when you furnish this form number 10, earlier the form number 10 merely required you to say the total amount of accumulation, and it earlier required you to mention what are the purposes for which the accumulation is being sought. So you could give 10 purposes, you could give 15 purposes, and you could say, I'm accumulating a sum of rupees 1 crore for all these purposes. Now, there you could spend, out of 1 crore, you could spend entirely 1 crore on one of those purposes, or you could spend 1 crore, 15 lakhs on one, 10 lakhs on another, 5 lakhs on a third, etc. So that freedom was there. Now, if you look at the form which has come in from last year, it requires a specification of amount accumulated for each purpose separately. Earlier, you could do the combined accumulation, as I said. Now, if you look at this form, it says that purpose for which accumulation is being accumulated or set apart, what is the amount, and period of accumulation setting apart, so ending apart. So this is unfortunately the way this thing is. The question here really is, what does the section require you to? It says that you can accumulate for this up to a period for this. Now, can this form lay down saying that you've got to give the bifurcation? Can the form lay down this requirement? And in my mind, I think no, the form cannot override the requirements of the section. The section nowhere requires you to specify for each purpose what you are required to do. So form cannot do that. So, the problem really is this, that if you want to modify the amount within these purposes, if you want to modify the purpose of accumulation, you've got to go back to the assessing officer. Say, for instance, you've accumulated funds for heavy repairs, for acquisition of new buildings, for the purpose of the trust. And say you accumulated 1 crore. And then you realize that, okay, my heavy repairs itself requires 1 crore. I mean, if you put, say, 50 lakhs in each, and you realize that my heavy repairs itself requires 1 crore, can you spend that 1 crore on heavy repairs and not without going to the assessing officer? My view is yes, I think you should be able to do it, because you're not changing the purpose of accumulation. It's only within the accumulation that you're deciding, how much, and the section does not require you to specify for each purpose how much you are accumulating. This is something which is coming in the form. It's not even there in the rules, so therefore the form cannot override the rules, nor the section. So there are any number of case laws in the context of charitable trusts earlier which were there, where in context of accumulation itself, that period of 6 months. Earlier, I remember the period of investment within 6 months was not there in the section. It was not there in the rules. It came in the form. And there the tribunals and courts have clearly held that the form cannot override the act or the rules. If the act and the rules do not specify the time limit for investment, the form cannot provide for that. The form cannot make it mandatory. So similarly, here, my view is that this is not mandatory. It's something which, you can give separate purposes. So long as you spend for those purposes, it's fine. That's not a problem. Now, the other thing is the form number 10 at the bottom also requires year-wise amounts of past accumulation and utilization. Now, the question is, this utilization till what date are you required to give? Because say, for instance, for the year ended March 21, now when you'll be filing your return by 15th of February, the utilization till 31st March 2020 is what you'll have to give, or till the 15th February 2021 when you're filing your return. I think it's 31st March 2020 because it's for the year that you're filing this form, and up to the end of that year, whatever is the position, that is the what you will have to spell out. Now, interestingly, one point which I just wanted to bring out is that you may have accumulated, say, one crore you may have accumulated, but in your actual computation, you may have realized that what you the exemption which is claimed is only for, say, 88 lakhs. Now, in that sense, what is the amount of accumulation? Is it 1 crore or is it 88 lakhs? My view is it is only 88 lakhs which is actually being accumulated. That is what you got to mention in the form number 10. That's the correct thing. And that is what you got to utilize. The second issue which is about the belated filing of the form number 10. With effect from assessment year 16-17, there was an amendment in section 11.2 and insertion of section 11.9, whereby the form is to be furnished on or before the date specified in section 139.1 for furnishing of the return of income. So this, what happened if the form number 10 is filed late? There was a CBDT Circular 7 of 2018, December 2018, which says that for condonation of delay, powers have been delegated to the commissioners under section number 9. The commissioners can condone the delayed filing of form number 10 and 9A for assessment year 2016-17. And the commissioner has to be satisfied that there was a reasonable cause and that investment has been paid in specified notes. Now that 16-17, which the delegation of powers has been extended to assessment year 17-18 by CBDT Circular 30 of 2019. And now further, it is extended by circular dated 3rd January 2020. It's extended to assessment year 18-19 and subsequent years. But what are the conditions? They say that a delay in filing of form number 10 up to 365 days can be condoned. So only 365 days delay is possible to be condoned if by the commissioners. If the delay is beyond 365 days, I think you can still make an application to the CBDT under section 119. Because what the CBDT has done is they have delegated powers under section 119 to the commissioners under this. Beyond that, I think you can go back to the CBDT and say that yes, there was a reasonable cause for this, and this is the, though the delay is more than 365 days, therefore commissioner does not have the power, but you have the power. CBDT definitely has the powers. And here also the satisfaction is that there was a reasonable cause and the investment has been made in the specified modes. Now, you had the Supreme Court decision earlier which said that the form can be furnished anytime till the completion of assessment. So suppose there's a delay of, say, more than 365 days and, whether that is still valid, the Supreme Court decision. So typically the problem really arises. Now let's look at it from a practical perspective. That you not file your form number 10. Now, you receive an intimation under 143.1 and that intimation comes to you, say, after a period of 6 months. Can the form number 10 be filed after the intimation under section 143.1 and saying that, okay, and then you apply for condonation of delay? Or even during assessment proceeding under 143.2, you can file that and, with the commissioner and, you can file it and seek the seeking of the commissioner, condonation of the commissioner. So I think it's possible to do that so long as the commissioner is concerned that the delay is less than 365 days. That should be possible. What happens is, of course, if the intimation, how do you rectify the intimation? I think you will have to then file an application under 154 once you get the condonation of delay by the commissioner. Then you will have to make a rectification application under 154 for rectification of the intimation. That is the way you will have to go ahead and. The next controversy is about, and this is, as I said, a very age-old controversy. It's something which is now for the last 25-30 years. And way back in 199 ITR 819, the Calcutta High Court in Trustees of Singhania Charitable Trust took a view that the accumulation should be for a definite and concrete purpose or purposes and not for the general objects of the trust. So what does the section say? The section says the purposes for which the income is being accumulated have to be specified in the form. So it talks about purposes. Now, is purposes different from objects, or is the object cumulative of all the purposes? Now, what if you were to fill up the form saying that, and many trusts have done this in the past, unfortunately, saying that accumulation is fine for the following purposes as per objects of trust. Sometimes some of the trusts have said that it is for, say the trust is for education, medical relief, relief of poverty, and advancement of any other object of general public utility. They said that this is for education and medical relief. So out of the 4 objects, they've selected 2 objects, say for instance, without stating what exactly an education or medical relief is. There could be a situation where you have not yet planned something, but you just say that for acquisition of building for in furtherance of activities of the trust. You have not planned to acquire a building. There's no plan today on the cards. Can you just say that acquisition of building? Or do you have to be specific vis-a-vis the particular project, saying that for construction of a building at so-and-so place or something like that? Do you have to do that? And the last issue, of course, is whether this purposes necessarily has to be a capital purpose, or it can also be for a purpose of revenue expenditure. I think it can be either for capital or revenue, but it has to be sufficiently large enough to require accumulation, and that is the thing. Because typically, it can also be for revenue expenditure, which is quite sizable. For instance, as I said, heavy repairs to the building of the trust. Now, that is something which could be, you could have an accumulation for that purpose. So that is something which is possible. As I said, Singhania Charitable Trust, this Calcutta High Court said it should be for definite concrete purpose. Otherwise, specification of purpose would not have been required. For a project needing heavy outlay to amass sufficient money to implement it, is what they say. So they're saying that it has to be a significant amount of expenditure, and that's why 11.2 is there. But for this, there is clearly all the other high courts have taken a contrary view. Delhi, Punjab and Haryana, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka high courts have taken the contrary view. General objects, for instance, they've said that even it could be for general objects, just as for objects of trust. So in the Hotel Restaurant Association, and there are at least a dozen decisions of Delhi High Court. I've not reproduced all over here, but the leading decision I've given. Karnataka in Ohio University Christ College also the same view is taken, that for general objects you can accumulate it. Interestingly, if you look at the form, the form you may have said that it is for the objects of the trust, but if your resolution specifies what are the purposes, then I think courts have definitely taken a view that that is sufficient compliance. So long as the resolution states that is sufficient. Say for instance, the case of Delhi High Court in Mamta Health Institute for Mother and Children, there the question was the form merely reproduces said for medical objects. But when you look at the resolution talked about acquisition of an ambulance, it talked about purchase of equipment for the hospital, etc. So that resolution talked about all those details, and therefore they said that that is sufficient compliance. The resolution, it was already in contemplation that it is for the particular purposes. So though the form may not specify it, but that is something which is purposeful. And the Gujarat High Court again in the Bochasanwasi Akshar Purushottam Public Charitable Trust, again there they've taken a similar view that even if it is not stated in the form, but it is given subsequently by way of a resolution or a copy of by way of a letter which confirms the intent, that is good enough, and that the SLP in this case, against the Gujarat High Court decision has been rejected by the Supreme Court. So far as the other cases are concerned, the other cases, I think in the Karnataka High Court, then one of the SLP has been admitted by the Supreme Court. So hopefully the Supreme Court will soon decide the matter. But really, if you look at it, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of this is that you want to incur a substantial expenditure, maybe within a period of 5 years, that you are accumulating for that. That could be for anything. It could be for various objects. So it need not be for specific objects. Purposes. So your purposes necessarily have to be within your objects very clearly. I think that there is no doubt about that. So you cannot spend anything which is other than the objects of the trust, because the trustees would otherwise then be liable. So therefore, I think there it's very clear that you will necessarily have to, furnish it. So you should get the benefit even if it is reproduced. But ideally, when you're filing a form number 10, list out, you can list out as many as 20 objects. You need not restrict yourself. You can give as many objects as you want, as many purposes. But try and be as specific as possible. It could be purchase of equipment. It could be purchase of buildings, it could be whatever for objects. You need not specify whether that building is going to be used as office building, it's going to be used as school building, for what purpose is going to be used, need not be specified. But you have to, I think it's advisable, to avoid this controversy, because this is something which is still ongoing. It's something which, until the Supreme Court decision finally comes, we will still see the department going after this, because all other things have been struck down in court. So the proviso to 215, etc., has been read down by the court substantially, as we'll see a little later. And therefore, I think now the department is running out of issues to litigate on. And unfortunately, this is something which is again being, you had this around 10, 15 years back. I think this issue was very hot. Then it cooled off. And then because of all the various high court decisions, but again, it has been resurrected by the department, and we're seeing this additions being made left, right, and center. Coming to the next issue of carry forward of losses, so far as the trust is concerned, the carry forward losses is not under Section 72 or 73 or 74, etc. The carry forward of deficit is implicit in the commercial nature of the income. The computation of income of charitable trusts, as you know, the CBDT circular of 1969 and various high court decisions have taken a very clear view that it has to be computed in a commercial manner. So you have to look at income in a commercial manner. That was the whole objective. Now, if you're looking at income in a commercial manner, what happens is, if you have incurred a deficit in 1 year and that deficit is made good in the subsequent year, so therefore you have utilized subsequent year surplus to make good this earlier year's deficit, and therefore you will the earlier year's deficit will effectively be set off against the income of the subsequent year. That view has been taken by various high courts, including the Bombay High Court in the case of Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. And that has been approved by the Supreme Court in the case of Subros Educational Society in 2018. The Supreme Court has approved this decision. I mean, this in carry forward of deficit, and therefore it is now settled that deficit can be carried forward by a charitable trust on a commercial basis. It's possible. So that is the. Now, the only thing I wanted to draw your attention to, and which is a problem area, is that if you look at the tax return format, for assessment year 2021, you have your schedule ER, that is the revenue expenditure schedule. Now, in the revenue expenditure schedule, you have various things, and finally, at the end of in clause E of that schedule, you have sources of funds to meet the revenue expenditure, and there are 5 clauses listed out there. So to meet revenue expenditure, what are the sources? Income derived from property or income earned during the previous year. So which is fine, so that you give. Income deemed as application in any preceding year under clause 2 of expression 1 of section 11(1). Now this is application only when exemption is claimed under 11 and 2. So this is where you opt to spend it in the subsequent year, where again, this has to be reduced. So therefore, this is also fine. The income which is deemed as application in the preceding year. Then income of earlier years up to 15% accumulated or set apart. So 15% accumulation. Now this is the problem one, because if you say that I have used my surplus of 15% which I'm allowed to accumulate each year, I have used that surplus to accumulate spend excess in this year. Then what are the consequences is what we need to see. Borrowed funds, that's the other thing, that if I've used borrowed funds to meet that expenditure, and any other, now any other could be in accumulation 11.2, for instance, or the thing. So any other, this is now, and then when they say total amount applied during the previous year, to arrive at that, what is the total that they arrive at? The total is, that is A16 plus B10, which is your total revenue expenditure incurred, other than that C, less E2. E2 is income deemed as application in any preceding year, which is fine because that is under the proviso that you have opted to spend it in the subsequent year. You have to reduce it, which is fine. E3, therefore they're saying that 15% which are accumulated or set apart in the earlier years, if you use that to incur a deficit this year, then that will not be. So therefore, I think this is something which you should not fill up. It's something which you need to take care. Similarly, borrowed funds. Now, borrowed fund, if you say that you have used borrowed funds, then yes, you will get a deficit carry forward. But to the extent of the borrowed funds, now those borrowed funds, as and when they're repaid, you will have to claim this as an application of income for charitable purposes. In accordance with that CBDT circular, that old CBDT circular of 1969, again, I think, where they've said that you can accumulate, if you borrow money and you repay the loan, that repayment of loan will be. So, in a sense, you can either claim a deficit by itself, or you can claim a repayment of the loan. But if the deficit is financed out of borrowed funds, then you will have to claim the borrowed funds, repayment of the borrowed funds as a reduction, as when you repay. That's the logic. And any other also, I think it's something which is dangerous, filling it up. So therefore, I think what you should restrict yourself is income derived from property or income due under the previous year, and because that is not to be reduced. Of course, income deemed as E2, which is income deemed as application in the preceding year, that definitely, I think, in case it's there, you've got to reduce it. So that's the. So similarly for capital expenditure, also you're required to give this details. There's a separate schedule for capital expenditure, and again, what are the sources of funds? The similar 5 details you've got to give. So, and only the net amount is taken to amount applied during the previous year. So therefore, I think it's now very important as to how you fill up the return form also. So you have to be very careful. The carry forward of deficit also now will depend upon the department to say that you yourself in the return have shown that this is out of this. Therefore, we are not allowing, So therefore, it's something which you need to really apply your mind to. So gone are the days when you could just fill up the return. I remember, in the 80s and early 90s, you would just fill up the article clerk would just put a stamp as per statement attached, as per statement attached, and the statement competition would be attached to that, and that was the way it was happening. So those days are gone. Now it's you got with this e-returns, there is an obligation to fill up the return properly and correctly. Otherwise, there could be a demand which could arise. So this is a problem area. The next controversy which I wanted to cover was on depreciation. As you know, there was an amendment with effect from assessment year 15-16, and we've seen this happening from assessment year 18-19 onwards. And 15-16 and 16-17 onwards, we've seen. And this is one of the standard questions which is being asked. Have you claimed depreciation on assets in the past, and or have you claimed capital expenditure incurred on assets in the past? And they've got standardized formats of assessment orders where they, say that you've either incurred this capital expenditure. Capital assets have been acquired either out of acquisition under section 11.2 or out of expenditure claimed as a capital expenditure under 11.1a, or the capital expenditure is so it has been effectively claimed as an application of income for, or it is out of your 15% accumulation under section 11.1a of earlier years, and therefore it is something which you are not entitled to depreciation because of that. So what does the section say? The section says where any income is required to be applied or accumulated or set apart for application, then for such purposes, the income shall be determined without any deduction or allowance by way of depreciation or otherwise in respect of any asset. Which asset? Acquisition of which has been claimed as an application of income under this section in the same or any other previous year. So the acquisition of the cost of that asset has to be claimed as an application of income under under section 11 in the same year or any other previous year, any earlier year. So that is so cost of acquisition has to be claimed as an application of income. You have under 1023C a similar provision which is there. Now, only clauses where income is, so this will, in the context of 1023C, this will apply only in cases where income is required to be applied or accumulated. Now, if you look at clauses 3AB, 3AC, 3AD, or 3AE, these are those cases where wholly or substantially financed by government or gross receipts less than 1 crore. Then there is no requirement of application of income. So it is an automatic exemption of the entire income. So therefore, there the question of having claimed cost of acquisition, if you are exhibiting on those sections earlier, you have not claimed cost of acquisition as an application of income in earlier years. So therefore, that would not matter. So even if you had in earlier years, you were under those sections, and now you're claiming under chapter 6, 6A, you should be able to claim, it was never claimed as an application of income, the cost of those assets. And therefore, you should be eligible to get the benefit of depreciation in calculating your income under 1023C. So far as, the deduction, whether it has to be, it says deduction in the same section. So 1023C has to be under 1023C. You should have claimed it as a deduction as an application of income. Section 11, you should have claimed it as a application of income under section 11 itself. Now, if you have earlier claimed exemption under 1023C, now you're claiming under section 11, or vice versa. Now you earlier were under section 11 and now you're claiming under 1023C. This prohibition will not apply. Frankly, there's a loophole over there that this only refers to that particular same section itself. So therefore, this will not apply. Now, coming to section 11, how will this operate? And that's what we have to see, that when you say claiming cost of acquisition as application of income, the cost may have been claimed either in assessment year 15-16 or thereafter or before. So any earlier year. Now, allowance of depreciation in earlier years, if you have been allowed depreciation on this asset, say for instance, I'm an entity, a trust which has been claiming depreciation all along. All over the years, I've been claiming only depreciation. I've never claimed cost of acquisition of assets as an application of income. I've only been claiming depreciation. So in that situation, what would happen? That will not be amount to claiming as the cost of acquisition as acquisition of income. I would feel that that will not the thing. In that cases, you can continue to claim depreciation. That should not apply. And according to me, clearly, when you talk about claiming the cost as an application of claiming acquisition of that asset as an application of income, there are only two clauses under which this could happen. If under section 11(1)(a), I'm saying that expenses incurred during the year includes capital expenditure on objects. In that situation, that is one situation which is very clearly covered. The second situation could be where I've accumulated income under section 11(2) for a period of up to 5 years for particular purposes, and which purposes include application, say for instance, I've accumulated for a period of 5 years, saying that it is for acquisition of a building. Now, within those 5 years, I spent it on a building. In that situation, also, I would feel that this is amounts to an application of the section 11(2) accumulation, and therefore it has been claimed as an application of income. So therefore, section 11(1)(a), your situation of the actual expenditure and the 11(2), both these situations, I think it would apply. In that situation, the prohibition would apply, and therefore, if you claim the cost under either as a capital expenditure on objects or as utilization of accumulation under section 11(2), in both those situations, it would be regarded as having been claimed as an application of income. Of course, even if you exercised under that option, you opted to spend in the subsequent year, and in the subsequent year you incurred that expenditure, it's still claimed as an application of income. So therefore, these three situations you will be this. But what if you received a corpus donation, or you received a corpus donation and out of this corpus fund you acquired this asset? Can you say that the cost of the acquisition of the asset has been claimed as an application of income? According to me, clearly no. Because what a claiming exemption for is for the corpus donation. The corpus donation is the exemption of the income, and it is not in by virtue of an application of income. It is by virtue of the fact of the very nature of the donation itself. So therefore, in that situation, this would not be regarded. This prohibition under section 11(6) would not hit you. So if you have received, say, corpus, or you receive donations towards building fund, and you acquire a building with that, now that very clearly will not be amount to claim of acquisition as application of income. So that very clearly. Similarly, if you acquired it out of funds accumulated under section 11(1), that 15% which you are allowed every year, so earlier it used to be 25%, then they reduced it to 15%. So the question here is, this does it amount to claiming the cost of acquisition as application of income? No, because there what you are allowed is 15% of your income you are allowed to accumulate, irrespective of So therefore, when you spend it on a capital asset, say that surplus, assuming you got the asset out of that surplus which you've accumulated over the period of years, you're still not claiming it as an application of income, no? So therefore, if it is not claimed as an application of income, according to me, very clearly, this provision will not apply. Unfortunately, the department's view seems to be that, even in the situation where you acquired it out of this 15%, it would still amount to, utilization claiming as an application of income. I mean, we are seeing standard assessment orders with the same thing reproduced over there, that it is either out of this or out of this or out of this, and therefore it has been claimed as an application of income, and therefore the depreciation is being denied, in a situation where the cost of acquisition of the assets has never been claimed. But it's possible that a trust may have on certain assets, capital assets, it may have claimed as an application of income. So certain capital assets, it may not have claimed it as an application of income. Now, this will apply only to those assets where it has been claimed as an application of income. And ideally, what you should do is you have two sets of assets so that you are able to prove that, yes, these are the assets on which I have been claiming as application of income in the past. On those, I will not claim depreciation now. So far as the other assets are concerned, I have not claimed those as application of income. Those were acquired either out of corpus donations or out of my 11(1)(a) accumulation. And therefore, for those assets, I'm entitled to the benefit of depreciation. Depreciation, as you know, has been settled. It's settled law that depreciation is allowable on a commercial basis, because for a commercial basis, when you can compute the income, automatically depreciation has necessarily to be allowed as a deduction. That's what the high courts have been saying. And therefore, I think, and even the Supreme Court has, in the case of Rajasthani, Rajasthani Trust, I think, charitable trust, they had taken that view. Then coming to the next point about audit report. Now, the audit report is audited and filed by the specified date referred to 44AB. So this is one of the conditions for exemption under in section 12AA1B. This is one of the requirements of this. And what is 44AB now? What is the date it refers to? The date it refers to is 1 month prior to the due date for furnishing of the return of income from assessment year 2021. That is what it refers to. So if your return is due by 15th of February, so by 15th of January is what you would need to have filed your audit report in Form 10B. So what is the position where the audit report says filed after 15th January 2021, but before 15th of February 2021, and before filing of the return of income, I filed the audit report. Or there could be also a situation where the audit report may have been filed after 15th of February 2021, but before the return is processed, it could be, or even after the return is processed, it could be. Here, fortunately, I think we have the CBDT Circular 2 dated 3rd January 2020, and where the under 1192, it's an order where commissioners have been authorized to admit application for condonation of delay for assessment in 2018-19 and subsequent years. They said that, again, like your form number 10, delays of up to 365 days in filing form 10B can be condoned. And the commissioner has to see that the assessee was prevented by reasonable cause from filing such application, they've said, within the stipulated time. Now, are we talking about the form or about the application? But the circular talks about the application within the stipulated time. I think the reference there should have been to the form. So if there was a reasonable cause for delayed filing of the form, then, and the delay is not more than 365 days, the commissioner would generally grant you the benefit of condonation of delay. And if even if the condonation of delay order is received subsequently, I think you are still entitled to rectify, get your 143(1) intimation rectified. Chances, of course, your 143 order may not have been passed, but in case the condonation is decided after your 143 order is passed, then also you are entitled to go for rectification under section 154. The next issue which I wanted to touch upon was on the taxability of corpus donations. In a situation where, as you know, our corpus donations received by a trust which is entitled to the benefit of exemption under section 11, there very clearly is a provision under section 11(1)(d) where the corpus donations are exempt. So 11(1)(d) says income in the form of voluntary contribution made with a specific direction that they shall form part of the corpus of the trust. So that goes without saying that it is exempt, so long as you have that specific direction which is there. Of course, there have been issues as to whether the specific direction has to be in written form or this. It's always better to have that in written form. So that. But what happens if the trust is not registered under section 12A or 12AA? It's a charitable organization, but it is not registered. Now you have 224(2)(a), which has been amended with effect from 1989. 2A talks about voluntary contributions received by a trust. Earlier, the language till 1989, the language was other than voluntary contributions towards the corpus of the trust. So corpus of the trust was specifically excluded there. Then from 1989, that was deleted. So the department stand has been that under 224(2)(a) now all voluntary contributions are taxable. Trusts, the corpus donations received by a trust are only exempt under section 11(1)(d). If you meet the requirements of section 11(1)(d), then only the benefit of exemption is available so far as this is concerned. The question is also now, there could be a situation where you could lose your exemption also. You may not have been registered at 12. There could be a situation where your 12AA registration will be cancelled. Now, what about corpus donations in such a situation? Corpus donation will be taxable. And there is a Delhi High Court decision in the case of, it's an unreported decision, Basanti Devi and Chakanlal Garg Education Trust. 927 of 2009 appeal, income tax appeal 927 2009 of a decision of 2009 Delhi High Court. And this Delhi High Court said that they dealt with the situation where the trust had applied for registration under 12AA. This was related to assessment year 2003-4. The exemption was granted in a subsequent year. The registration was granted in a subsequent year. Delhi High Court said that this is a capital receipt and not a revenue receipt, and therefore it is not taxable at all. And Tribunal for Assessment Year 2002-3 also in the same case has taken a similar view that because just the mere fact that it has been registered in a subsequent year would not change the fact that this is a capital receipt and not a revenue receipt, and therefore not taxable at all. And incidentally, the Delhi High Court decision, the appeal has been dismissed by the Supreme Court, but unfortunately, the dismissal is only due to the monetary limits which are laid down. To go to the Supreme Court, there has to be the tax effect has to be exceeding a particular limit. So at that point of time, whatever is the limit, because of that limit, it has been dismissed by the Supreme Court. Now let's look at what the tribunals have taken a view after this. Thing. We have in the Agra Tribunal in Gaudiya Granth Anuvid Trust, where the tribunal has taken a view that it's a capital receipt, corpus donation is a capital receipt, not taxable, even if the trust is not registered under 12A. Similar view has been taken by the Calcutta High Court, and they said that the position after amendment is similar to position prior to 1973. Corpus donations are not income, and they relied on the Bombay High Court and Kasturbai Sindhia Commission Trust, 189 ITR 5. And there's also Bombay High Court in R.B. Sriram Charitable Trust, where the similar view has been taken. Though I think the position is not so very crystal clear, but the way they've interpreted the tribunal, that yes, this is the correct position. It's a capital receipt. And then there's a Calcutta tribunal again in Ramakrishna Samiti, where the tribunal has observed that if a receipt is by birth capital in nature, it cannot change its character merely for want of registration of society under 1312AA. The Mumbai tribunal in Chandraprabhu Jain Shwetambar Mandir, and there were corpus donations received with specific directions that it should be applied for the specific purpose for the which the respective fund were created. They are capital receipts, being capital in nature, they were not taxable. In spite of the fact that the trust was not registered under 12AA. So therefore they held that this was not taxable at all. Serum Institute of India Research Foundation, Pune Tribunal, again, specific voluntary contribution being in nature of capital receipt are outside the scope of income under 224(2)(a), and they cannot be brought to tax even if the trust is not registered under 12A or 12AA. Now, these are all cases of charitable organizations. Now, so similarly, there is another decision also of Bank of India Retired Employee Medical Assistance Trust, 172 ITD 78. And here also, this was not registered under 12A because of the fact that it was only for employees of Bank of India. So it was not for the benefit of the general public. So therefore, this was a trust which could not have been registered under 12A itself. So in that sense, not charitable in that thing. There it was received, corpus donations were received with specific direction by donors that to be applied towards a specific purpose for which respective fund was created. And this will be, that was to be treated as capital receipts. That's the view of the tribunal. And that could not be brought to tax despite the fact that it was not registered under 12A. So all the tribunals have consistently taken a view that this is a capital receipt, not chargeable to tax at all, notwithstanding the fact that they are not entitled to exemption under section 11(1)(d). 11(1)(d) is only for out of abundant precaution. That's the view which the tribunals have been taking. That even otherwise, this is a capital receipt which is not chargeable to tax at all. And here then you have the Bangalore Tribunal and Visakhapatnam Tribunal also having taken a similar view. In fact, Bangalore Tribunal, one of the issues there was that those were donations which were for a specified purpose, and they were for the building fund, for instance. So the issue there was, Bangalore Tribunal said that these are tied up grants, these are tied up donations. So they can be used only for that specific purpose. So therefore, and that purpose is a capital purpose. So therefore they said that this is not income at all in the first place, And again, here they said this is, if at all, it's a capital receipt and therefore not taxable at all. So that is the view they've taken. Similar view again by Vizag Tribunal in Hosanna Ministries. So all these tribunals have been taking a view that even if you're not registered under 12A or 12AA, though you don't get the benefit of exemption under section 11(1)(d), you would still continue to get the benefit of this being treated as a capital receipt. It is not taxable as income at all. That's the view which they've taken. The question which arises, and whether section 56(2)(7), now you have 56(2)(10), earlier 56(2)(7) was to tax any amount received without consideration. So, as you know, 56(2)(10) applies also to would also apply to charitable trusts in this situation. So, question here really is this: that can 56(2)(10) be invoked to tax a corporate donation received by a charitable trust, which is not exempt under 12AA or 1023C? See, if you look at 56(2)(10), there is an exemption for amounts received to or from or by a charitable trust, but which is registered under section 12AA. That is the provision. So the question, what if it is not registered under 12AA? So 56(2)(10), therefore, do I not get the benefit of that exemption, which is then 56(2)(10), and does it become taxable? Because all gifts are effectively taxable, and a corpus donation is really a gift. It's a donation for a charity, because for charitable purposes it's called a donation, but it's really a gift. So therefore, since 56(2)(10) taxes capital receipts, can it be taxed altogether? And this argument, actually, if you look at Serum Institute's case, this argument of 56(2)(10) had been raised by that time. It was 56(2)(7), I think. That argument was raised by the department before the tribunal, but the tribunal, brushed aside that argument. They did not specifically decide on that argument. There was no specific finding on that argument, but they held in favor of the SSC following judicial discipline. All the other tribunal decisions, etc., they referred to the High Court decision they referred to of Delhi High Court. And that's how they arrived at the conclusion that this is, not chargeable to tax. They did not specifically address the applicability of 56(2)(10). That was specifically not it. So therefore, that brings us to the general. Can we say that 56(2)(10) is a general provision, and 224 is a specific provision, and so if it does not fall within these specific provision, something which does not fall under the specific provision cannot be brought to tax under a general provision. You can't apply a general provision just because a special provision fails to tax it. So say for instance, 11(1)(d) is there, you have 224, 2A, etc. So if it cannot be brought to tax under those sections, can it then be brought to tax under 56(2)(10)? I think that is an argument which is a valid argument, that when you have a specific provision, just because something is exempt under the specific provision or does not fall within the purview of the specific provision, does not mean it falls under the general provision necessarily. And the other thing is, what you look at section 56(2), it starts off: income of every kind which is not to be excluded from the total income under this act shall be chargeable to tax under the head from other sources. That's how it starts with. So question here really is this, that so far as the corpus donation is it an income in the first place? And is it something which is not to be excluded from total income? I think a view is possible that a corpus donation is not an income in the first place at all, and therefore it does not fall within the 56(2) itself. But I'm aware of the fact that the definition of income you have a separate clause which does say under section 224 that income chargeable to tax under 56(2)(10). So in a sense that deeming fiction is there in the definition of income. So therefore this is something which there is likely to be some more litigation on this. There's likely to be some issue on this, but as I said, there is a strong view that corpus donations received by trust which is not registered in 12A are not taxable at all. I think, and that to my view and to my mind is the better view of the matter. Let's now come to the last, this on the proviso to 215. As I said, proviso to 215, you find umpteen number of decisions. This has been ever since this amendment came. This has been a very hot area of litigation. Primarily, I think if you look at the various decisions of, particularly the Delhi High Court, you have the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, you have the India Trade Promotion Organization, you have GS1 India's decision of Delhi High Court, or you have the Indian Standard Institution decision of the Delhi High Court. Now, all of these decisions, what they have said, And again, you also have Gujarat High Court in the case of Indian. They've talked about Ahmedabad Management Association, and there's Sabarmati Ashram Goshala Trust. Similarly, Bombay High Court in the case of Nasik Panjapur Trust. So all of these decisions, basically, they have said that if you're carrying out an activity which is in the furtherance of your objects, and incidentally some income arises out of that activity, that does not make it an activity in the nature of trade, commerce, or business, and that would not vitiate your exemption under Section 11. The proviso to 215 would not apply in that situation, and in that situation, you will continue to get the benefit of exemption. As you know, what does the proviso to 215 say? The proviso to 215 says that if you're carrying, if in the course of the advancement of any other object of general public utility shall not include any activity in the nature of trade, commerce, or business, or any activity in relation to trade, commerce, or business, irrespective of how the income from such activity is utilized. So for a fee or consideration, and irrespective of how that income is utilized. So that's the sum and substance of the proviso 250. So therefore, they're saying that so it has to be firstly advancement of any of the objects of general public utility. Secondly, it has to be in activity in relation to trade, commerce, or business, or an activity in nature of or in relation to trade, commerce, or business. There has to be a fee or consideration which is charged. In those situations, they're saying that this will not amount to a charitable purpose. If that does not amount to a charitable purpose, then you will lose your exemption under Section 11, and the entire income will be subjected to tax. That's the way the whole provision works. Now, all these decisions, as I said, they've said that if you're carrying out some, say, for instance, in Nasik Panjapur, the question there was, they were carrying out or Sabarmati Ashram Gaushala. They were having aged cattle. You had a Gaushala which had this aged cattle over there, or in the Panjapur also they had this aged cattle. And there, what was happening is that the milk and other milk products were sold by that, and the revenue from that was quite substantial. So there the court said that how can you say that see, what is the main objective? The main objective is looking after the aged cattle. Now, in the course of that, if they get milk and they sell that at the market price, that does not make it a commercial activity. They are not doing that. That is not the intention. The intention is not to carry on that activity. The intention is to carry on a charitable activity. Incidentally, they're getting some income from that, so that would not attract. Similarly, now this case of United Way of Baroda, the Gujarat High Court looked at it. As you know, United Way of Baroda organizes the Garba program every year, and it's a very big program attended by many people. Generate substantial income.
विवेक गाड़ी बोल रहा हूँ. उठा क्या? अच्छा, आज मेरे को आने जमेगा नहीं ना भाई.
Some cost talk, somebody. Anuj, if you can just mute that. Yeah, okay. So the question there was that there was income from Garba was there, and that was being used for various charitable objects. So there the High Court very clearly said that this is it was to be utilized for what was the profit making was not the driving force or objective of the SSC. It was more like a fundraising thing. So if it is a fundraising activity, that would not make it lose its charitable character. So that was there. Similarly, in the case the Madras High Court recently, this was a case where they had what we call as a Kalyan Mandapam, which is a community hall, sort of a marriage hall. That was utilized for the income from that, letting out of that was utilized for educational purpose, medical relief to the poor. And the Madras High Court said that is the objective of that is only to ensure that you have income which is used for your charitable purpose. Profit making is not the whole purpose, and therefore you are entitled to the benefit. And recent Bombay Tribunal decision in the case of CREDAI, this is the Confederation of Real Estate Developers of India, where this was a case in Mumbai Tribunal where the SSC used to hold an exhibition every year, and they would get participant fees, sponsorship fees, and all that. And those monies would then be used for the various objects, etc., of promotion of the real estate sector and thing. And they said that really because you're earning substantial income with that, so with that, so that is not your objective. Your objective is to generate knowledge about the real estate sector, to generate this thing, awareness about the real estate sector. And therefore, this would not get affected. Your exemption would not get affected. Similarly, you had other Bombay tribal decision, I mean, Calcutta tribal decision in case of Indian Chamber of Commerce. That's a classic decision again. And followed by the Bombay Tribal IMC Chamber of Commerce, where again, Indian Merchant Chamber. So where they've again taken the view that merely because you have some income from other activities, say for instance, issuing certificates of origin or arbitration fees, that does not change the fact that your main purpose is not to carry on those activities. Those activities are incidental to your main object of promoting trade, commerce, and industry. And therefore, you are eligible to continue to get the benefit of exemption, provided to 250 will not apply. And lastly, the funny part of it is that this amendment, the provision 250 was inserted after the Supreme Court decision in the case of Gujarat Maritime Board. In Gujarat Maritime Board, the Gujarat Maritime Board was running ports in the state of Gujarat, was regulating and running some ports in the state of Gujarat. And the purpose was said that, that is not the purpose, that should not get the benefit of exemption, and therefore this was brought. Now, Gujarat Maritime Board itself, recently the tribunal has said in Gujarat Maritime Board's case itself that the provision to 250 does not apply to it. So therefore, this is an amendment which seems to have completely misfired. I think, it has created unnecessary litigation and harassment for a large number of charitable trusts. So hopefully, I think in a couple of years from now, hopefully, that issue will no longer be such an issue, unless they amend these section itself again, which will give rise to a fresh round of litigation. But I think this is something which now the courts have automatically, when you have a harsh provision, that harsh provision is automatically read down by the courts to make it workable, to make it something reasonable. And that is what has happened in the case of provider to 250. It was extremely unreasonable the way the department was trying to interpret it. And I think that's where, you see that this has been a good, way that the courts have read it down, because otherwise a large number of charitable organizations would have to actually shut down their activities. Well, I think that covers all the issues which I wanted to cover, and I'll be happy to take any questions now.
Thank you, Gautam sir. I think there are certain questions which I've received in the chat box. I think there are several questions of Usha Kadam ma'am. So I will unmute her so that she can raise the questions personally to you.
Sure.
Usha ma'am, please, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Gautam bhai, I have one query relating to carry forward laws.
Right.
As you rightly said, in Schedule ER, they are giving you the option whereby you have to write specifically that whatever amount is a surplus, what you have spent more than your income, what is the reason for that? I mean, in normally small trust, when they spend more than the income, the reason is either they have earlier years accumulation. Can you throw some light on some circumstances which would lead to carry forward loss besides having the earlier years income which you have spent more?
You have spent out of the corpus, because you got a corpus donations and you spent out of the corpus. That could be one of the reasons. You could have spent out of the amount accumulated money. As I said, if it was out of 11, you could have out of the 15% accumulation, or it could be 11-2 accumulation, or you could have been where the option was exercised. Now these would be the circumstances. Now in a situation where you've incurred it out of the income of the year, obviously that will be allowed to you. That is not to be deducted. But if you incur it out of borrowed funds, that will be deducted. If you incurred it out of corpus funds, according to me, that should not be deducted, though the return really requires you to deduct it. And I would feel that, it's a question of how you fill up the return. And I would feel that I would not fill up in that portion. I would still show it as a deficit in that situation. Now, I don't know when they're processing it, whether when you get a intimation that saying that this is not matching, etc. So they would want to match with the income. That's something which we'll have to wait and see how we'll have to deal with it. So, but as I said, yeah.
Sir, but if you have a deficit, you can't upload the return. It keeps giving you the error.
No, I agree. So, this is so therefore, if it is out of borrowed fund or any other, So therefore, please specify. You can specify that if it is out of corpus. So then in the subsequent year, you can say that, okay, this is recouped out of the borrowed funds or the corpus. In the subsequent year, possibly that could be a.
Okay. Okay. Sir, I have one more question.
Yeah.
So generally, there's a charitable organization which runs a school, and it's for disabled children. So normally what happens when a person has to give a donation, he gets a check of some other person and saying that, okay, take the donation in my name, though on the check someone else's name is written. So in that circumstances, can you issue a donation receipt to that person?
See, now the problem will come in when you have to find a statement of donations. Now you will have to give the name of the donor.
True,
So,
true.
so that is where I think the problem is. You can acknowledge the efforts of this person who has helped in getting a donation. But that donation is really from that third person, really. So that's the way I
True,
would.
true. Even though it is a relative, generally they get a check of some close relative and say that give a donation receipt certificate in my name. So I think we cannot give that certificate, right?
No.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
I think these were the questions which we have received. Maybe we can wait for a minute for members to raise their questions. Yes, Meeta ma'am, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Just one query. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, in case of a society any entity registered under the Society Registration Act, so they have taken the PAN as a AOP. They have not registered as a trust at all under income tax. So can we continue them as AOP, or do they really need to register under a trust?
See, this is a problem area, frankly speaking. I think the problem is really in the act itself and the understanding of the act by the CBDT. And see, if you look at the income tax return forms, they talk about AOP into benefit trust. So now, let's take a case where yours is an AOP situation. There could be a Section 8 company or a Section 25 company.
Correct,
Now,
correct.
that will be with as company. So similarly for society, I think the appropriate this is AOP only or a BOI, correct?
So
you don't need
they
to
will
change
not
your
get
PAN.
any exemption under 11, 12, whatever, and they have to continue as AOP MMR, that's at the maximum marginal rate.
No, you have to fill up the forms number 7 is what you've got to fill up. So you've got to fill up as a charitable organization only. Though your PAN
But
number,
I don't have the PAN as a T. No, I have the PAN as AOP. So I will not be allowed to fill up 7.
is it so? I don't think that's a problem, frankly speaking. I mean, ATR 7 because
No, ITR 7 doesn't accept A as a PAN number. I mean, we're getting an error.
I see.
But if they are not registered under 12 AA, can they avail the exemption under 11 and everything?
No. Unless you're registered under 12 AA, there's no question, no? And see, a society doesn't necessarily be a charitable organization. A society could be something which is, say, a mutual association, for instance.
Correct. Yes. So this is basically a mutual association for a common objective. They formed it. But now the question was whether they should go under the trust or they should continue as an AOP.
The point you have to remember is there are two different things. One is the concept of mutuality. Second is concept of charity. The concept of charity means I'm giving the benefit to the entire public, not just my members. So I may incidentally give it to my members, but I also give the benefit to the entire public, general public. The other, this is where I'm giving benefit only to my members. If I'm giving benefit only to my members, then I'm a completely mutual organization, not charitable at all.
So the issue here is when you register under society registration, you have to compulsorily register under the charity commissioner.
Not necessarily, because if your object is charitable, then only. See, a society could be for an object which is not charitable. So I've seen cases of societies which are not registered with the charity commissioner, though they are registered under Society Registration Act, for which the Deputy Charity Commissioner is the authority, is the regulator. So therefore, the fact that they have opted to be registered also as a charitable trust, now therefore you have to examine the objects. Are the objects, what are the objects and what are the activities? So that is what you have to look at. Is it charity or is it mutuality? That's what.
Okay. I got your point. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
I think we have as in answered all the questions, and then there are no more, no further questions also. I think we can move towards the concluding part of the session. So first of all, before taking up the pleasant task of vote of thanks, would like to make a couple of announcements. One is we have a public meeting on budget, which is organized by CTC, the Chambers of Tax Consultant, along with Investors Grievance Forum and along with the Matunga Studies Circle, being the other joint organizers. The meeting is scheduled on Tuesday, which is February 2, from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And the link for the same has been already shared on the WhatsApp group. I request all the members to take maximum benefit of the lecture. Kindly note that there are no CP credit available for the said meeting because it's the second announcement is that we have our own lecture on budget session by our own member, Mr. Pradeep Kapasi, on 7th of Feb. The link for which will be circulated during the course of this week. So accordingly, the members are requested to register themselves for a VCM. With this announcement, I now move to the pleasant task of vote of thanks. I think I think I'm justified by Mr. Gautam sir when I said that he's a stalwart and an authority on taxation of charitable trust. I think the manner in which he navigated us through the amendments, through the provisions and through the controversies and simplified them, and the clarity which is given to us at the end of the session is indated by us. And I would say that everyone, all the members would agree that we are far more knowledgeable and far more expert than we were at the start of the lecture, and then we are now. And with this, and I must say that when we approached Gautam Bhai, he readily agreed to take up the session, and I think that's how he's also attached with our Matunga Study Circle. With this, I would request all the members to present an applaud for his efforts and to present a virtual round of applause. Thank you, Gautam sir.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, sir. So the presentation material will be circulated on the WhatsApp as well as on the email. With this, we wait to see all the members on the 2nd as well as on the 7th.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Gautam sir.
Thank you.